Hi, so I'm CJ. I am non-binary and bisexual, and I am an Asian American, Chinese American to be specific, living in a very liberal area, liberal city. And so I'd first like to say, like, I try to be nuanced in what I'm saying. I try to be like intersectional in my criticisms. And so if any of that feels like it's generalized, if any of what I'm saying feels like generalizing, judgmental, please let me know. I am always happy to listen and learn. But to get into it, my point, my video is about white queer Americans and how they often make being queer a huge part of their personality. Um, Due to lacking a community or culture that they just don't have due to being raised as an American, as white queer Americans. And so I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of an Asian American queer person. And so yeah, let's get into it. So America is known as this melting pot. You know, a lot of people use that as a metaphor for America. They say, oh yeah, America's like this big melting pot of cultures. But a lot of the time, like, these people don't know that that metaphor actually has racist origins and was used to target people of color and immigrants historically. Um and it just pushes the expectation that those who are American, they must become Americanized, and they have to assimilate and disregard their own cultures from whence they came, just to fit into this idea of a perfect American. So that also ties into like the American dream and stuff, but I'm not going to get into that. So basically, a lot of the time, like, immigrants, they come to America and you'll hear people telling them like, oh, speak English, you know, this is America, or do this, behave this way, eat this type of food, and you'll be American. But that's like often very difficult for these people, and I noticed this as someone who has immigrant parents. um it's like they expect you to disregard these really important parts of yourself that you've grown up with, and all of a sudden you come to a new country and they're like, this isn't good, this isn't like this culture that you're a part of, it's not something that we want to see. We want to see you act this way, we want to see you act this way, do these things, buy these types of clothes. And so a lot of the time, like, you feel sort of, you feel like this culture is not good. It's not, it's like just not something that should be appreciated or should be shown off. And so that's how I felt growing up when I'd go to school and my white classmates would ask me like, "Oh, what is that you have for lunch?" You know, they would, this is a really common Asian American experience, I know. But it's also like, ooh, ow. But it's also really common, and it shouldn't be so common because, like, why are these children, why are literal children questioning me on what I'm eating? You know what I mean? And so, you can also think of the melting pot metaphor as, you know, mixing paints. So you have a bunch of paints, rainbow colors, and you mix them all up, and what does it turn into? It turns into this really muddy, desaturated brown color. It's not as vibrant. And so that's the melting pot metaphor. It's just, you abandon some parts of yourself, you assimilate into the good parts of another culture, and you just become this entirely different person. And so this leads, this lack of culture from white queer Americans can often lead to appropriation of other cultures, like ballroom culture, which was started by Black and brown queer people, and also trans people, of course. Love my trans sisters and kings and brothers. Yes. But anyways, sorry. But people like, especially on TikTok, I'm not on TikTok anymore, but like I was briefly recently, and Instagram, they'll misuse terms like trade or clock it, and they'll use like, they'll miss they'll do certain like hand gestures like incorrectly, like this instead of this. And that's a little bit like appropriation. And so this appropriation can also lead to like making a mockery or distortion of certain cultures, and you sort of you ignore the rich history behind these cultures. You ignore why these cultures came to be. And so that can be problematic because like you want to be a part of a culture, but you don't want to learn about the history. You don't want to be informed about why you do these things. Like that's a little, and so I'm going to speak on two examples. The first one would be the finger clapping from ballroom culture, like this. I've seen a lot of people use like their index and thumb. That's incorrect because um it originated from when, you're holding a cocktail or you're holding a little fan, and you can't really clap traditionally, right? So you do this, and it's like, okay, like you're working, you're serving, you're eating down. And so, when you see someone Vogue and such in the ballroom. Anyways, another example is like clock it being used incorrectly. It means to like notice something, but an example could be like Justin Bieber misusing clock it. Like, it's not clocking to you that I'm standing on business. Like, that's what that mean. But yeah, basically, all this to say, I do think that queer history education and maintaining spaces that are meant for queer POC, like just being aware, moving intersectionally, all that is really important to maintaining a rich, vibrant history, and also just making sure that the culture stays what it is, culture. And yeah, thanks for watching.